Do you remember Wilfred Benitez?
What Benitez won it! It is over! We await the decision!
The youngest world champion in boxing history, crowned at just 17 years old? He stood in the ring with legends like Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Durán, earning millions and representing the pinnacle of Puerto Rican boxing talent. But fast forward to today, and the same man who once danced around the world's best
I think they ought to stop it now.
can't walk, talk, or even feed himself. How did it all go so wrong? To understand how Wilfred Benitez's story took such a sharp turn, we have to go back to where it all started.
I want to prove to the people that I'm the best of the world.
With a kid from the Bronx who did things in a boxing ring that nobody had ever seen before. Born in 1958, Benitez was raised in a family where boxing wasn't just a sport. It was the family business. His father, Gregorio, was his trainer and manager. His mother, Clara, kept the household running like a tight ship. His older brothers boxed too, but Wilfred was different. Even as a child, he stood out. He didn't just have fast hands. He had a sixth sense. He could see punches before they were thrown. His reflexes were freakish. The family knew early on they had something rare on their hands. By 15, Benitez wasn't just sparring. He was fighting professionally, going toe-to-toe with grown men twice his age. At an age when most kids were stressing about homework, he was cashing fight purses and building a record. He didn't look like much. Skinny, baby-faced, not especially intimidating. But once the bell rang, he became El Radar. The boy who could dodge punches like he had a built-in warning system. He'd slip a jab, duck a hook, and counter before his opponent even finished their swing. It wasn't luck. It was something close to genius. The turning point came on March 6, 1976. Wilfred Benitez was just 17 years, 5 months, and 23 days old. He wasn't supposed to win. He was facing Antonio Cervantes, a 2-time world champion and seasoned veteran. Most saw it as a mismatch, a kid versus a grown man with a resume. But Benitez didn't just survive, he outboxed Cervantes over 15 rounds. When the final bell rang, the judges awarded him a split decision. Just like that, Wilfred Benitez became the youngest world champion in boxing history.
147, Wilfredo Benitez.
A record that still stands. It wasn't a fluke, it wasn't a lucky punch. It was ring IQ, defense, and the kind of poise you don't expect from someone who should have been sitting in a classroom. The win sent shockwaves through the boxing world. Suddenly, every promoter wanted a piece. Fans in Puerto Rico and New York crowned him a hero. He wasn't just a champion, he was proof that raw talent and discipline could beat experience. But that kind of early success isn't easy to carry. The pressure hit fast. Benitez moved up in weight, chasing bigger names and bigger paydays. He wasn't just defending titles, he was collecting them. And by 22, he had become a 3-division world champion with belts at junior welterweight, welterweight, and light middleweight. That's something only the greats managed to do, and he did it before most people finished college. But while he made it look easy inside the ropes, life outside the ring was a different story. The fame, the money, the constant attention, none of it came with a manual. Training took a back seat to late nights, and the people around him, not all of them had his best interests in mind. Boxing is a tough business. It chews up young fighters who don't have the right support. Benitez's youth made his rise extraordinary, but it also made him vulnerable. A teenager thrust into an adult world, expected to handle pressures that would crush most grown men. Still, when the lights came on, he delivered. He'd stand in front of world-class opponents, slip their best shots, and make them look average. His defense wasn't just effective, it was mesmerizing. He didn't rely on brute strength or overwhelming speed. He fought with instinct, timing, and intelligence. That's why people started comparing him to Willie Pep and Benny Leonard, guys whose mastery of the craft set them apart from the rest. Benitez's rise was so fast, so dazzling, it almost didn't seem real. But with every new title, the stakes got higher, the spotlight got hotter, and the pressure to keep winning never let up. The cracks started to show. He was still racking up wins, still collecting belts. But one question loomed louder with each fight. How long could a fighter so young, who started so early, keep going at this level? What came next would test him in ways no teenage champion could ever prepare for. Because winning titles was just the beginning. The real test came when he stepped into the ring with some of the biggest names in boxing history, fighters whose names alone could fill stadiums. And those nights, more than any championship belt, would shape the rest of his story. Climbing to the top in boxing isn't just about grabbing belts. It's about surviving the toughest nights against the best in the world. Wilfred Benitez did that better than almost anyone. By the late 1970s and early 80s, he was making history every time he laced up his gloves. These weren't just title bouts. They were defining moments. Let's start with January 14, 1979 in San Juan. He was only 20, but he was going after Carlos Palomino, a respected champion who wasn't about to hand over his belt. The bout was close and brutal, a 15-round battle that left both men digging deep. When it was over, the decision was split, but Benitez came out on top, becoming a two-division world champion. It was a huge step, but it was just the beginning of the mountain he'd have to climb. The stakes only got higher. On November 30th that same year, he walked into Caesar's Palace to face Sugar Ray Leonard. It was a record-breaking event. Benitez earned $1.2 million, the highest purse ever for a non-heavyweight at the time. The world was watching. The fight itself was a chess match, with both men showing off their defensive skills and ring IQ. Benitez took a knockdown in the third round, got cut from a headbutt in the sixth, and stopped with just 6 seconds left in the final round.
He gets Leonard against the ropes. Right there! A quick left! Astonishingly! There! He got him down again! It seemed almost inevitable.
The cards all favored Leonard, but Benitez had gone the distance with one of the greatest fighters of all time. His own father had warned before the fight that he wasn't training as hard as he used to, but he still managed to push Leonard further than most ever could, and he didn't slow down. On May 23, 1981, he became the youngest three-time world champion in boxing history, knocking out Maurice Hope with a finish so clean it was named one of the year's best. But the real test came next. On January 30th the next year, he faced Roberto Durán, Hands of Stone, the guy known for breaking opponents down. But that night, Benitez flipped the script. For 15 rounds, he outboxed him, picking him apart and winning a unanimous decision. It was a masterclass. Benitez at his absolute best, showing he could handle raw power and relentless pressure without losing his cool. But boxing never lets you relax for long. On December 3rd that same year, he stepped into the ring with Thomas Hearns at the Carnival of Champions in New Orleans. Hearns, with his reach and power, was a nightmare matchup. Benitez used every bit of his defensive genius to stay in the fight, but after 15 tough rounds, Hearns got the majority decision. This is where it all starts going downhill. It was a hard loss, and for Benitez, it marked the start of a new chapter, one where the damage started to pile up. The cracks that had been forming behind the scenes, missed training, mounting injuries, the wear of constant pressure, were getting harder to ignore. If you just looked at the record, it still looked impressive. The wins were still coming, so were the paydays. But the real story was the punishment. The battles against the likes of Leonard, Durán, and Hearns were leaving marks that wouldn't fade. The sport still celebrated his brilliance, but the price he was paying was growing with every round. And outside the ring, it wasn't any easier. The same system that put him on million-dollar stages didn't protect him when the lights went off. Behind the scenes were shady promoters, lopsided contracts, and deals that didn't always go the fighter's way. Benitez was still a star, still a hero, but the world he was navigating was about to show him just how unforgiving it could be. Argentina was supposed to be just another stop in his long career, but what happened there changed everything. After his 1986 fight with Carlos Herrera, where he was stopped by TKO in the 7th, Benitez expected to collect a $25,000 purse. It wasn't much by his old standards, but it was supposed to pay bills, support his family, and get him home. Instead, he was blindsided. The promoter, who held his passport, paperwork, and paycheck, vanished. Benitez claimed the man disappeared with everything: his ID, his money, his way out. The promoter, for his part, denied any wrongdoing. But the facts remained. Wilfred Benitez was stranded in a foreign country with nothing. Think about the reality of that situation. One day, you're a former world champion, and the next, you're stuck in Argentina without a penny to your name. His wife reportedly told him not to come home without the purse, adding even more pressure to an already desperate situation. So he stayed. I mean, what other choice did he have? Benitez was left to fend for himself, and the world around him seemed to shrink. The crowd was gone, the cameras were gone. Only the consequences remained, and the fighter who once filled arenas was now invisible, forced to beg and rely on the kindness of strangers just to get by. This wasn't just a story of one crooked promoter or a single act of betrayal. What happened in Argentina exposed something far darker. Boxing has always been the Wild West of professional sports. No union, no pension, no oversight. The industry, described by some as an unreconstructed piece of the capitalist system, let promoters and managers hold all the power. And the athletes, the very ones who bleed for the sport, are often left with nothing when things go wrong. Benitez's situation was a brutal example of that. He didn't have financial literacy. He didn't have a safety net. He relied on others to manage his career, and when they vanished, he had no way to protect himself. He wasn't just unlucky. He was the inevitable product of a sport that profits off young fighters and abandons them when they break. For over a year, he wandered Argentina, homeless, desperate, and humiliated. Eventually, word of his situation reached the right people. But it wasn't the boxing world that came to his rescue. It was government intervention. First from local authorities in Argentina, then from Puerto Rico, that finally made a difference. After a long and humiliating ordeal, Benitez was repatriated in late 1987. But the damage had already been done. He came back to Puerto Rico a broken man. The financial loss was devastating, but the trauma and humiliation left deeper scars that no amount of applause could ever heal. This experience didn't just mark the end of his career as a top-level fighter. It accelerated the collapse that was already unraveling. His health was deteriorating, his finances were gone, and the sport he'd bled for offered no support, no structure, and no lifeline. For Benitez, it was a lesson that came too late. The world saw his downfall as a single, tragic event, but it was really the result of years of neglect. By the people around him, by the business of boxing, and by the sport itself. And as his body began to show the true cost of all those years in the ring, the warnings that had been ignored started to catch up with him. By 1986, the signs were undeniable. Benitez was in trouble. A neurologist confirmed what some had already begun to suspect. Years of punishment in the ring had triggered early neurological damage. The advice was direct and urgent: retire from boxing immediately. Even his mother, Clara, noticed the first subtle changes. She saw her son slowing down, his reactions dulled, his movements not quite as sharp. For a fighter whose gift was anticipation, these changes were hard to ignore. But he kept fighting. Why? Because for Benitez, boxing wasn't just a career. It was his identity. He'd been fighting professionally since childhood. The sport had given him purpose, attention, and a paycheck, even as everything else grew more unstable. But the truth is, boxing made it far too easy for him to keep going. The sport's regulatory system was inconsistent at best. One time, he reportedly failed a pre-fight physical in Argentina, a red flag that should have stopped everything right there. But the bout went ahead anyway. That wasn't a rare mistake. In boxing, if one commission said no, another would say yes. Promoters, managers, and even some athletic commissions prioritized short-term gains over long-term health. If a fighter wanted to keep going, there was always someone willing to look the other way. His own discipline issues made matters worse. Even in his prime, he wasn't known for rigorous training. His natural talent covered for these lapses, but as the years went by, the cracks started to show. He took more punches. He recovered more slowly. Opponents who never would have troubled him just a few years earlier were now landing shots and doing real damage. The punishment was compounding, and the warning signs were no longer subtle, and for some reason, he still kept fighting. Financial pressure played a major role. The money was gone, but the lifestyle and the responsibilities remained. The people around him either couldn't help or wouldn't. For many fighters, retirement feels like death. Walking away from the ring is like giving up the only thing that makes them feel alive. The cheers, the spotlight, and the sense of purpose were too hard to give up, even as the risks grew. And finally, the consequences caught up. In 1989, Benitez was formally diagnosed with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain disease known as CTE, or dementia pugilistica, the irreversible result of repeated brain trauma. It started with memory loss and confusion, but over time, it destroys a person. Looking at his record, it's clear that every fight after 1986, every round he shouldn't have fought, made things worse. He continued to fight until 1990, finally retiring at the age of 32. By then, the decline was undeniable. His condition had erased the very gifts that made him famous. The sport that once lifted him to glory also stripped it away, piece by piece. This is where the story takes a turn that's painful to witness, even for those who never saw him fight, because the next chapter isn't about titles or million-dollar paydays. Today, Benitez's life looks nothing like the highlight reels that once defined him. The man who once thrilled crowds with reflexes and brilliance now can't walk, can't speak, can't even feed himself or control his own body. Every basic function, eating, dressing, hygiene, depends on someone else. Those years in the ring have left him broken. Since the death of their mother in 2008, Benitez's sister Yvonne has been his sole caregiver, working around the clock to keep him comfortable and alive. She does everything, administering medication, managing his feeding tube, and stretching his limbs to slow muscle loss. She's the first to admit it's a job with no benefits and no end in sight. There's no paycheck, no pension, no support system, just love. But even love has limits. She describes it as a commitment that leaves her physically and emotionally drained, but still, she refuses to walk away. For Wilfred, Yvonne is everything. A nurse, a therapist, a constant presence in a world that's grown painfully small. Financially, the situation is bleak. The same World Boxing Council that once handed him his championship belts now sends just $200 a month. A pension that doesn't begin to cover his medical needs, let alone round-the-clock care or the specialized equipment required to keep him safe and mobile. The rest falls on Yvonne, who's already exhausted the family's resources. There's no trust fund, no retirement plan, just a sister doing her best and a sport that's turned its back. The struggle to provide even basic necessities is relentless. Even getting him to a doctor's appointment is a challenge. The family fought for years to secure an accessible minivan, but still, help is scarce. The boxing world, for all its talk of honoring its legends, leaves the real work to families already pushed to the limit. The contrast is heartbreaking. Benitez was once a national hero, Puerto Rico's pride, a prodigy who filled arenas and made headlines. Now he lives in near total isolation, rarely leaving his room, unable to recognize the faces that once adored him. The cheers are gone, and the world that once celebrated him has moved on. What remains is a quiet struggle, far from the spotlight, where every day is a battle just to survive. Things only got worse after Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico in 2017. Medical care collapsed, and survival became the priority. With help from friends, former boxer Frez Oquendo, and the Chicago Puerto Rican community, Wilfred and Yvonne relocated to Chicago. It wasn't a fresh start, but rather a rescue mission, one that showed more clearly than ever just how alone they were. Yvonne's commitment is nothing short of heroic, but it also highlights a much bigger problem. Boxing profits from the pain and sacrifice of its athletes. But when those same athletes need help, The system is nowhere to be found. Families like the Benitezes are left to carry the weight alone. The emotional toll is immense, but the alternatives, nursing homes, abandonment, or worse, are unthinkable. For a man who earned millions and stood among boxing's elite, is this the thanks he deserves? When you look at his story, you see more than just personal tragedy. You see the broken business of boxing, financial exploitation, medical neglect, and an industry that discards its people the moment they're no longer profitable. Boxing loves its champions until it doesn't. So what do you think? Should legends be left to rot while the sport moves on? Or does boxing owe its heroes more than just applause? The questions are endless. What needs to change? Mandatory health insurance? Retirement plans? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear from you. And as a final note, 80% of the proceeds from this video will be donated to Wilfred Benitez and his sister to support his ongoing care. So if his story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button so the video can reach as many people as possible. By watching and sharing, you're helping make a real difference. If you'd like to help out directly, contributions can be made to Yvonne's PayPal and Venmo in the description box below. Every bit helps. See you in the next one.